Excellent. So just to start, do you want to tell me a little bit about your position at UD?
Sure. So I am a distinguished professor of material science and engineering, and with a joint appointment in chemical and biomolecular engineering. I also run a couple of centers on campus.
Excellent. And how long have you been here? I know you're relatively new.
Right. So I joined almost 3 years ago. So January 2018, I joined. I joined as a tenured associate professor.
Okay.
And so I had spent almost 11 years in a prior position.
Okay. Great. And what do you like most about being on faculty here at UD, or areas of more satisfaction?
I like you know, so I'll take a step back in terms of comparison. I think what was appealing with the position at UD was that the folks who were recruiting me could clearly articulate what value I brought to the university.
Mm-hmm.
They could articulate the work that I do professionally. They saw me as a fit to the larger research enterprise at UD.
Mm-hmm.
And so that articulation was important, and how that's been borne out in my experience here has been that I've had the support from my colleagues to delve into new areas. And there's really a way for us there's clearly a collaborative environment and collegiality that makes it a special place to do collaborative research.
Great, good to hear. And is that something that you had at your prior institution, or does it feel a little bit different here as far as that sort of collegiality or collaboration?
I think that, if I gave a talk about my career and kind of this intersectionality piece last week. And I think upon reflection, what is clear to me is that a lot of times as a woman of color, especially someone who's untenured, you're valued as you are a woman of color in this position because often you're first, right? And only. And so the value that you place is the value of you being there and you being that kind of shiny piece on the mantle. And so while there were pockets and great collaborations, great colleagues, pockets of people who appreciated the work that I did, I think what you are often faced with is this environment where you have to feel as if you don't do it well, then no one else will come behind you. And so there's always like this lens that people are placing upon you, this magnifying glass about every piece. And so I think that in a prior position, I had a small set of great collaborators, but I think that the biggest challenge is that the value of my work was not what was valuable to the community, to put it in succinct terms.
Yeah, no, that's really useful to hear, the distinction there. And as far as kind of your time at UD, are there areas that you can think kind of top level that might need to be improved, or are things that you're kind of less happy with?
So that's kind of open-ended, and maybe by design, but maybe if I can play some context, are you asking about top level things that can be done to improve the environment for women of color, or are you asking just in general?
So I think in general, like your own personal experiences, and then we'll just be kind of aggregating across all the people that we're talking with.
Sure. So, I think in general, what we have fantastic leadership at the top. I think there's, a lot of vision, a lot of support, where I think there have been, especially in the face of some financial challenges and things like that, is how we invest and how we parse out in times where there is few, how do we parse out resources to continue the successful ventures that are happening.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that we as a university have some struggles with that at the moment, right? There's, because of the UD's culture, I think there's this emphasis, and rightly so, on equity.
Okay.
But equity in the absence of understanding context is really hard to do when you have limited resources.
Right.
So this idea of equity and fairness and not necessarily conflating the two is often a challenge. Okay. And so if we are interested in continuing the upward momentum and trajectory, I think it's important for us to make sure that we kind of revisit our stance and to invest in those places that are invest in those places and people and opportunities that will allow us to grow as a university. That doesn't mean to cut certain people out, but it does mean that we have to provide the support that folks need.
Okay. Yeah. So the next questions I have are sort of specifically about your department and your experiences within your department.
Sure.
Do you feel as though you fit well in your department?
Absolutely.
Great. And then how would you describe the climate, kind of collegiality and that sort of thing?
Right. So I sit in two very different departments, and not different, one is good and one is bad, but just different in terms of history. So I sit in one department that's relatively young. So we're about 22 years old, and which is young for an engineering department. Mm-hmm. And that department is so diverse. I mean, in so many different ways, right? That it is clearly one that, walking in right away, I am who I am, right? Mm-hmm. And that's everyone. And we appreciate that. We appreciate the uniqueness of every single person, from, faculty to staff to students. And that's quite refreshing, right? Yeah. So it's very collegial, very informal type of environment. In fact, I was talking to a colleague just about my hiring experience. And, he mentioned to me, when we were discussing, there's this really, great person that we want to hire, there was never a talk about, okay, she's a female or she's a Black female. It was about my work.
Yeah.
And he said it was not until he heard my name that he actually kind of got a clue.
Right.
Right. And so that to me kind of reflects that environment. In the other department that I'm in, it's a very long history, and also a department with, a lot of visibility nationally and internationally.
Okay.
And in that department, I also feel very well supported, just differently, right? Because it has its own set of rules. It's much more rigid, whereas the younger department is fluid. So the more rigid department, though, has relaxed its borders in some ways to really address and communicate what we value. And diversity is something that we value and we talk about and we address on many different levels.
Great.
But because it's larger and older, the momentum of it. So I still feel very supported. I'm invited to everything. I'm included. My voice is not marginalized in any way. And we make sure that, new faculty and everything are also included. But they're just different.
Okay. Great to hear you kind of explain the differences there, because we have faculty with all different experiences. So I'm getting to know the departments as I talk to people. And then what about access to resources that you need? Do you feel like you have what you need to do your work and feel supported in that way?
I think that in general, yes. If I go back to my earlier comment about how we allocate resources, and this idea of fairness and equality in probably the most rigid terms, that can be very challenging. So I think that what we're struggling with now is, especially through the furloughs and things like that, are the lack of human resources.
Right.
And I think that those are impacting then kind of research resources. And, having leading centers or trying to start centers in the midst of the rigidity of the process is taking up way too much time and also challenging what we're able to achieve. So yes, the resources are there. The time scale in which those resources are made available can be challenging.
Okay. So
But I don't necessarily, I don't necessarily think those are things that are unique to myself. I think they're just the consequences of this time in this space. And as UD is trying to re-envision how we want to be seen in the community.
Right. Yeah. So you're already seeing impacts of some of the staff losses, it sounds like, or the reallocation of staff.
Right. So I launched the center in August. Well, the center was announced in June. It officially launched in August, and we still don't have all of our staff just because everyone's been impacted, right? COVID, everything. I mean, and of course the impacts now of our human resources. So.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for clarifying that. Yep. And then what about access to important information, or kind of feeling like you're a part of the decision-making process, or kind of have that information about decision-making?
Yes, I do. I think that if I would have to offer some perspective, say as a female or as a woman of color, I think a lot of times that access to information and access to the people who can make decisions is often driven by how loud your voice can be. And so my male counterparts, their leadership styles may be very different and more abrasive. And because of that, they tend to have access or to get what they want in a different way than I may.
Yeah.
Because that's not my style. And I have to own that, because I'm not going to change who I am for a specific piece, right? But I think part of the discussions, especially, given diversity and inclusion, racial injustice, social injustice, everything that's been happening as of late, what it has caused UD to really think about is how we listen to people, how people's voices are heard.
Yeah.
And I've had to have those conversations, right? Like, and give people pointed examples. If I'm in a room and this person X is in the room, they can say the exact same thing that I said, and you listen and you provide access. But if I say something and I can say it, as loud as I possibly can, and in a very, diplomatic, strategic way, and people now get it. And I've been forced to have those conversations. But I think that people have been either oblivious, they don't want to deal with it.
Yeah.
But I think this particular climate that we are in has forced people to be cognizant of it.
That's interesting to hear. Yeah. And do you think part of your ability to kind of to push these issues or have these conversations is helped by the fact that you're a senior faculty member, you're sort of, sounds like top of your game, right? So you can kind of have that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is, I think that I can go into a room now, given, in the last 3 years, the amount of support that I've been able to either bring in, with collaborative grants. And clearly it's not just me, right? Like, these are clearly team efforts, but the fact that I've been a part of that leadership, there is some cachet that comes with that, right? But I also think that my voice was as equally heard when I first came in. People wanted to know, to hear me, right? Senior leadership, again, value, I remember I went to some meeting. My husband started about 3 months before I did here at UD. And I went into a meeting and senior leadership knew my name. I had never met them before, right? Yeah. So it wasn't as if I wasn't valued. the conversations that we're having are different. And I think that this is the first time, at least from the engineering and science side, they've had a female a Black female who sits at the table.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, great. And then I have some questions on mentoring. Now, I don't know at this point in your career if you have a mentor, or probably you're serving as a mentor, right, for many people.
So I do a lot of mentoring, and I've been blessed to have some fantastic mentors. One who used to be a former colleague with me at my previous institution, who I told him he can't get rid of me. And then I have a group. So ironically or not, I'm a chemical engineer. When I was a graduate student, there were less than 10, actually probably 4 full professor chemical engineering Black female faculty in the US.
Wow.
Across
That's
the US.
striking. Yeah.
So I think by the time I was maybe 3 or 4 years on the tenure track, we finally reached about 10.
Mm-hmm.
So over the course of my time, graduate school till now, I have a group of Black female chemical engineering faculty who are presidents, deans, department chairs across the country, who are, near peer mentors. And so that informal group of supporters, and I don't even necessarily call it, it's mentoring, but it's mentoring at its purest sense. It's not, prescribed.
Yeah.
It's really just a group of people who are invested in making sure we're all successful.
Mm-hmm.
And that means that even, I've had friends who were, provosts who were interested in jobs at other places, who came to me for advice because I had experience at, place X, right? So I think that level of just investment in making sure that we all are clearly, the best and the brightest, and celebrating every single win, that's the truest sense of mentoring and advocacy and support. And I think that's been a tremendous blessing to me.
Great. Yeah, that sounds like a wonderful community. Yeah. Great. Do you know much about sort of the formal mentoring that happens in your department, or do you have a sense for whether that's working well?
Right. So, again, I think this is department specific, right? So my department, again, being small and a little bit less formal, I have a mentor. I have a mentee. And I think that just happened. I mean, yes, it's on paper, but I think it's really kind of organic.
Okay.
I was the chair of, that particular faculty member's hiring committee. Our fields are closely aligned. And so I've kind of functioned as a de facto person since I was already doing it. It just made sense.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. And then I have a few questions about your, about your department chair, but I guess given your split appointment, that's kind of a challenge. I guess your chemical engineering would be your home department, and then
so material science is actually my home, and chemical engineering is my, So because most of long story, research, it's a research fit.
Okay. But you
our primary research fit, but I'm a chemical engineer working in soft materials. So that's the fit.
I'm a social scientist, so all of this.
Yeah, it's and I had, the other great thing about UD is that I had the option, right? Like it wasn't as if it was prescribed to me. I had the option. So if you can ask me questions about the department chairs, because they're actually really close and we work closely together.
Oh, okay. Okay, great. So that'll work. So, I mean, I just would like to know, and to give you kind of backstory here, so in some cases, we're finding that there are clear issues with leadership within departments. So I just wanted to know whether you think your chair is an effective leader, or just kind of how you describe your chair.
Yeah, so I think they're both very different just because of the very different environment, but they're both very effective, right? So they are, they have a pulse of what's important.
Yeah.
They are compassionate. They're supportive. They're responsive. They are team players. It's not as if, okay, I sit here and you sit there. We're all in this together, and they make sacrifices, right? And so they are very much effective department chairs on both levels, just in very different styles, and very different departments to lead. But their compassion, their collegiality, and their willingness to listen, and to not get completely perturbed by the many personalities,
Right.
and really keeping the departmental vision, keeping us on that vision when we often become very siloed and narrowly focused. I think it's important.
That's great. That's refreshing to hear after some of the the previous cases I've heard.
Yeah, I also think it's very different. It's, from discipline to discipline, place to place, because I've been in several meetings with faculty of color, and I know it, I probably live in a utopia compared to what I've heard.
Yeah, there is just, different styles and different kinds of hierarchies in departments. So sounds like you have a very nice setup for sure. Has either one of your chairs been able to do anything to kind of increase your satisfaction, improve the department climate? Any anecdotes that come to mind there for?
So, last year we've done a couple of things. We've, in the more, formalized way, we've come up with strategic plans where we have D&EI efforts that are clear, and that we all have communicated as our values, right? With kind of metric-centered, measurable items that we're working on.
I love that. Okay.
And then I think, especially, going back to this kind of current racial, gender climate that our country is going through at the moment, we have spent considerable amount of time discussing it and having very difficult conversations, and something that I don't think that we would have ever done, from students to the faculty to the staff, people being very transparent, people being very intentional. We have put in diversity workshops. And so we replaced one of our research seminars with diversity workshops. We have, have diversity statements for our department. We also have our research speakers share, if they're willing, a slide about them. So to personalize research, so for example, we may look and say, okay, here's a white male, he's never gone through anything. And then he talks about, I come from a first generation, these are my challenges. This is how I grew up. No one could help me navigate these pieces, because we make assumptions, right? Just by what, and the assumptions we usually say, okay, are based on the fact that, you're female or you're X, Y, or Z. But we all have, a story. Yeah. And so being able to humanize research and academia, I think helps people appreciate the work and the steps that people are taking in their own careers. So it helps graduate students say, hey, well, wow, if that person can do it, then yes, I can, because we typically only see the success stories. People don't really talk about their challenges.
Exactly.
Or their upbringing. So I think those have been quite intentional. And some of it has been because we have younger faculty who, through their advocacy roles, or, social media has been a fantastic, at least in our community, more the chemical sciences, social media has been something that people across the country have just sat with what's going on. So one of our junior faculty members is part of a recent publication in one of the scientific journals that uses kind of a synthetic approach to DEI, which she and a bunch of younger chemists across the country got together for happy hour like every week over the summer, and they crafted this article, right? And so
Wow. You'll have to share that one with me. I'm curious about that one.
yeah, so there are these things that, there's another senior colleague in one of my other departments who she's in more computational work, so she's started a kind of a women in computational little coffee chat, right? As part of my role in the MRSEC, we partner with the Princeton MRSEC to do a soft matter for all to highlight diversity in soft materials research.
Nice.
Across the country. So I think at least in my discipline, we've used social media and our research platforms as a way to kind of integrate across our departments and across our kind of research enterprise. And that's been very helpful.
Wonderful. Yeah, and I can see that helping with, the fact that there are a lot of, people in token positions or siloed or sort of, one and onlys. So to have that ability to connect must be really, really nice. Great. And then sort of thinking about more broadly the university, do you have any thoughts about the climate for faculty? I know 2020 is a strange world, right?
Right.
But kind of, outside your department, what do you think the climate feels like?
So I think that my challenges have been primarily outside of my departments because people don't feel like you belong.
Yeah.
You walk the halls and, whoever they think you are, you don't necessarily belong in front of a classroom or, with a chaired position or, these types of things. Right. And I've had other faculty yell at me because I'm supposed to adhere to their rules. I've had staff members who say that I can't talk to their faculty.
Wow.
That if I have an issue with the faculty member, that I should come to them and not talk to the faculty member. Right. And that I know that would have never happened, if it was a male, and definitely if it was not me. Right.
Yeah.
So those, and to that, I quickly went to that department chair and communicated my displeasure. And that department chair, because I had a relationship with him, because I served on some committees with him, he immediately responded and dealt with it. Right. But not everyone has that luxury, right? Whether it's because you're a junior faculty member, whether it's because you don't have any advocates or allies on campus.
Yeah.
And so I think that we have to continue to celebrate diversity across many levels, right? And we don't do that. And we celebrate some things, but we don't celebrate everything. And there's not a real opportunity for us to connect and come together, right?
Yeah, you had said something really interesting that struck me at the beginning of our talk today, about kind of feeling like when you came to UD, people saw you for kind of your work and who you were as a scholar, as opposed to kind of like filling a diversity or sort of checking the box. Do you feel like that's something that the rest of the university is still grappling with, or do you have a sense for that tension? I know even in my own department, and you think as a sociologist, we know what diversity means. We can go down this route of we need a scholar that looks like X, Y, or Z, right, for diversity. And it's a hard tension.
It is. And I think that is clearly a struggle of academia right now, right? Like people are being called to the carpet about not having diversity, whether it's in your research symposium, whether it's in your lab, whether it's in your faculty, right? And interestingly enough, I've had tons of people in the community and folks that I don't even know actually comment about how diverse my two departments are. And I was on a panel 2 weeks ago about this, and someone asked that question. And it was so interesting to me because when I thought about it, so chemical engineering, we have now 4 Black faculty, male faculty, and 1 Hispanic male faculty, and me.
Mhm.
Talking about faculty of color. I think I've gotten everyone, which is huge.
I know, say that's impressive. Yeah.
Right? And in material science, we have 2 Black faculty members and 1 Hispanic faculty member. And of course, we have, a variety of, we have a large female population in our faculty. And when I think about sitting on the other side of that, when we're talking about hiring, we talked about diversifying our applicant pool.
Right.
We talked about where we were recruiting. We made sure that in certain disciplines, there's a specific recruiting mechanism through conferences where you kind of meet people and things like that. We made sure that we all went and encouraged people who may not feel like they were good enough to apply.
That proactive piece. Yeah.
Right. So we were proactive in doing that. But our selection process was still the same. We had our values, valuing the work and valuing those things. And diversity, we wanted to make, so it's hard to kind of explain it, but at the end of the day, everyone that we hired and everyone was enthusiastic about was not about just color. Right. And so the fact that all of these people were on one accord, like, this is the best person ever. And it wasn't, this is the best Black person, this is the Black female ever, this is the best Hispanic person ever, Asian person. It was about, this is the best person for this job. And the fact that through this process, whether intentional or unintentional, we have come up with a way to diversify our ranks is amazing to me, right? Yeah. And other people are noticing it.
Yeah, no, my first
so whatever that magic sauce.
Yeah, we should do like a case study on how you guys are able to do, because it sounds like best practices, right? You're able to broaden the pool, and then from that go through the right kind of a search, and you end up with these positive outcomes.
Yeah, absolutely. And the enthusiasm is just, completely amazing to me. So I think that is something that's being noticed.
Great. That's really good to hear. So I just have a sort of one more set of questions, more about sort of decisions to stay or go.
Okay.
It's a little odd because you're relatively new here, but
right.
Have you thought about leaving UD at any point in the last several years?
Phone was ringing.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, my phone was ringing, so then that meant that everything stops.
Oh, no problem. Do you need to take that? Are you okay?
No, I'm fine.
Okay. Have you thought about leaving UD at any point in the last, I guess, 3 years that you've been here?
No, I haven't thought about leaving UD. I think it has been the right place and space for me to be, especially given the unique opportunities that I've been able to experience here, right? And that have been placed with me, and the team of people that we built, this cadre of folks who are committed to the efforts that we have in place.
Okay, excellent. And would you say your level of satisfaction has increased or decreased over time?
It really depends on the day, but
right.
So I think that I have, if you had asked me this question in June, before all of these centers happened, I would have said it was probably like a 9.
Yeah.
I think I think there have been some unique challenges that I think were avoidable. So, I'm probably tempered down to a 6 at the moment, right?
Okay. Yeah. And that's with the launching of the new centers and all of that responsibility added to your plate.
Yes, but I think it connects further to, are we building the infrastructure to be able to operate on this scale?
Mhm, mhm. Okay. Um, and just to follow up there, a theme that came up in some of our previous interviews were sort of promises made with regard to maybe when people were recruited in with access to resources or labs or startup, and then maybe a lack of follow through or a slower than anticipated follow through. Have you experienced any of that, or do you have a sense for?
So not on my startup, but I think with the whole center launch, yes,
Mhm,
there's been a lag and hesitations and,
mhm.
still waiting for X, Y, or Z,
Okay.
or a backtrack on, certain promises, things like that.
Okay. Yeah, that's
But I do,
consistent with what we've
yeah.
heard then. Okay. Um, I have no answer for that one, but you are not alone in experiencing
No, I think that's, yeah, I've heard this one
that.
quite a bit.
Okay. And then, I mean, that's all that I have. Just I wanted to give you open space if you can think of anything that UD could do to kind of to do better with recruiting and retaining diverse faculty. Um, be it salary, climate, anything that comes to mind.
I think that, we often, I think I said it earlier, we often give things, whether that's resources, titles, money, extra salary, whatever, to those people who scream the loudest,
Hmm.
which often tend not to be diverse faculty.
Yeah.
And in some cases, it's because of imposter syndrome. In some instances, it's because of culture. Sometimes we just feel like the fact that we're here is enough. Like we don't deserve,
Yeah.
right? And so I think transparency, I think it doesn't always have to be the squeaky wheel gets the oil, right?
Hmm.
It's embracing, rewarding many levels of contributions to the university, right? Um, I've talked about the fact that a lot of times diverse faculty are often the best teachers, right? So why can't we have a teaching award that happens while we give kind of research prizes for um, junior faculty, right? But why can't we have the same for teaching or for, you know, outstanding service to the community? And especially when you talk about UD, we have a breadth, my perspective is engineering, but we also have, the humanities, right? And social sciences. So we have to start thinking about what are the unique skill sets that folks are bringing. And yes, it's their scholarly work, but we don't value it in the same way. It's not what people say,
Right.
right? And so we have to allow folks to be their best and their brightest and to somehow value that in a way that is commiserate with what academia usually values, right? And that's been a hard one. I think I've seen across the spectrum of places that I've been, and understanding that you don't have to fit a mold.
Mm.
We often expect people to, do it this way and that way and this way, and this is the only way to success. But to help people find their own voice. I have a graduate student who's starting her faculty position in January. And
Okay.
I think my biggest piece of advice to her is to be who you are. Don't let anyone tell you that this is your only path to success.
Yeah.
Right. And so, and I can see how she has been impacted by that. Right. And how people have tried to put her in a mold, even from, her starting as a graduate student many years ago in my lab. So,
Mhm.
yeah, the university has to just figure out ways to reward and support and acknowledge how hard things are
Yeah. Yeah.
and to especially when you are the only person, right? To have those conversations, to have department chairs who are willing to say, hey, let's just have a conversation, dump it all on me, let me know what you're experiencing.
Mhm.
And most people are they're practice avoidance.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because we don't want to deal with our own insecurities or our own biases. So we would rather just leave it alone. If they don't come to me, I don't want to talk about it. But if you
Sure.
see someone who's clearly, challenged, or, connect that person with a resource that's outside of campus. If they're the only person and they are, having challenges here. I mean, we do this in this group that I talked about. So if there's someone who's siloed, hey, reach out to me whenever you have a question.
Right. Right.
And we don't necessarily, I think that those are ways in which we can support people.
Yeah, that's fabulous. We're going through some of this in my own department, so I'm
Mhm.
listening carefully. These are really, really fabulous ideas. I appreciate you taking the time to share with me
Sure.
as well. Well, that's all I have. But if anything comes up that you can think of, please do reach out and let me know. And I'd be happy to share the results when we're done with the research as well.
That'd be fantastic.
All right.
All
Thanks
right.
so
You
much,
take care.
Lashonda. Bye.
Bye.